Welcome to Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase. Brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com. Alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. And now, here's your host, Rob Chase.
Hi, this is Rob Chase with Cutting to the Chase. Brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com, an alternative newspaper for the Inland Northwest that's online. Today our guest is John Selck, and John Selck is with the John Birch Society. So let's cut right to the chase. John, who was John Birch?
Oh, my. John Birch was an authentic hero. It was an era, right at the end of World War II, we had a real tangible enemy. We found out how malevolent that the communists were at that time, because 10 days after the war ended, he was on an Allied mission on a railroad bed. The communists stopped him and murdered him. They obviously knew who he was, his career. Killed him. Some have said he was the first casualty of World War III. Indeed he was. He was an unusual man. He was an American missionary operating in China, very fluent in Chinese. General Claire Chennault of the Flying Tigers made him a spotter because, again, he could operate behind Japanese lines without being detected. I remember seeing a picture of Claire Chennault, the head of the 14th Air Force, the Flying Tigers, you remember? Right. Putting the Legion of Merit on the uniform of Captain Birch. A short time later, he was the first casualty of World War III. But he was a man of real belief. And we live in a kind of an era of cynicism, Rob, where it's hard to know who's an authentic hero, who's a pretender, who has an agenda. There have been, and we've wanted to have in the John Birch Society, people with the pure motive we can have. We're for the country, not for ourselves. And John Birch was a worthy symbol. So when Robert Welch formed the society, after having heard from a U.S. Senator about this martyrdom, Mr. Welch wrote a book called The Life of John Birch, which we still make available. He thought he was a worthy symbol for our undertaking. That's a long answer to a short question.
Well, a lot of people, they've heard of John Birch, but they don't know who he was. They assume he owned a candy company and it started this thing, where in fact it was actually Robert Welch.
That's right.
And you worked for Robert Welch. What inspired him? Well, John Birch inspired him, of course, but deeper than that was John Birch was kind of like, the environmental movement had the spotted owl or whatever.
Yes.
So our movement had John Birch as their
a
symbol.
symbol.
Okay.
But Robert Welch is the instigator, the initiator. Robert Welch was a candy manufacturer with his brother back in Boston. The Welch Candy Company, Sugar Daddies, Bonbons, it was a great company. What he did that was so unusual in my experience, he gave it all up when he was 57 years old. Spent 18 months coming up with a business plan of something that might be able to stop the socialist and communist takeover of the world at that time. We had handed Eastern Europe and China to the communists after World War II without a ribbon, but we handed it to them. Yeah. And the socialists were devouring Western Europe, Rob. Right. Remember, you look at the Brits, the French, and the Germans, they all had forms of socialism. Mr. Welch was a world traveler, a brilliant student. He was reading when he was 2, learning algebra and French at 4, and had conquered mid-past 9-volume world history when he was a 7-year-old. Needless to say, he was home educated by mother, right? But Mr. Welch, as a successful businessman, was a regional vice president and director of the National Association of Manufacturers, the most important business group in America, of entrepreneurs who built businesses from the ground up.
He must be turning over in his grave now.
Oh my word, oh yes, exactly. Now, I don't want to be nasty here, but I'd make a big distinction between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which sometimes acts like the lapdog of the government, the so-called public-private partnership.
Well, I feel like the Chamber of Commerce's, their main priority is, well, we're going to make a few bucks out of this.
All right, well, Rob, you put an edge on it. Good. Cutting to the chase. But the NAM was a group of entrepreneurs who believed in competitive free enterprise. There, Robert Welch became known by the men who were directors from around the country. When he formed the society in 1958, 3 past presidents of that NAM came on our board, our national council. We probably don't have a civic group in America that had 3 past NAM presidents. But on that initial board, we had the head of the Notre Dame Law School, the former aide to General MacArthur, the former head of the 14th Air Force, General Stone, who succeeded Claire Chennault. We had luminaries, and so it was a businessman's approach. Robert Welch, though I worked for him as his personal representative all over America, it was a great job for a young man, climbing a ladder to meet with people who were far above me in this world, okay? We found that most of these great guys did not know how to market what we were going to do. It was an intangible, and the enemy had already done everything possible to neutralize us in our cradle.
Oh yeah, you had luminaries and all that, but you immediately ran right into, you might even say, the deep state of that time.
That's a great point. The deep state was in place long term, and Mr. Welch understood it, but more and more it became revealed. So the society is a business-like approach to a problem that's too tough to be done by people on the fly. There has to be a business plan. These initial guys were drawn to his brain power, because he was a super genius type, but also the fact that he knew how to do things. That's the story of the beginning of the John Birch Society. And John Birch was a proper symbol for such an idealistic endeavor. In fact, when Mr. Welch ended the founding meeting, his appeal to the 11 people sitting to listen to him for 2 days, come join us now in our proud companionship and our epic undertaking. That's an idealistic appeal to the American people. So you want people who can dream high dreams of freedom, not people who are operating at a real base, selfish level. John Birch was unselfish.
Well, there was, I remember in the early 60s, when I was a little kid, it seemed like there was a lot of folk music on TV. You had Hootenanny and, not the Dick Clark show so much, but I forget what they all were. But I think Art Linkletter's brother, in fact, hosted one of those. But the New Christie, not the New Christie Minstrels, the Kingston Trio came on, and they had a song about ridiculing the John Birch Society that quickly.
They tagged us on. It's
Yeah.
kind of funny when you look back.
Yeah.
We were kind of a symbol of an age. Post-World War II, Korean War era, we were really a whole new departure. Nobody had ever done this in history.
But you were kind of tagged or blamed for the sins, if you want to call them that, of Joe McCarthy.
Oh, yes.
Who rose out of the same...
That's right.
Yeah,
Well, Donald Trump is a worthy successor to a long-term habit of the socialists, using the captive media to beat up on their rivals. Joe McCarthy felt it, we felt it, a few others had, but this has been so successful that we no longer have anybody in Congress investigating subversion of America. The House Committee on American Activities was dismantled. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee is gone. We're still here, Rob. In fact, I like to say, and I guess one of the reasons I'm in the area, it's one of my favorite areas, Birch is back. I say that loudly. Birch is back.
Yeah.
And our presence will be very evident around here in a very constructive
I have
way.
a friend who's been a Bircher almost as long as you have, but he was telling me, they always ridiculed us, but, and they would laugh at us, but people aren't laughing as much anymore.
Oh, my word, how true that is.
Yeah.
We are in a time, I like to say, there's never been a better time for telling the truth about liberty, because now you can hear the siege engines banging on the gates of the walled city.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a wizard to realize America's under attack. I like to say it's like having somebody's competitor advertising for his business.
Well, you can, I think, the average person can watch the mainstream news and now realize, we're they're not being upfront with us. There is a man behind the curtain, so to speak.
Well said.
That's kind of operating these things. How can the mainstream news say this, but I go on the internet and it says something completely different? So even though the internet is, Google and Facebook and YouTube, they're all owned by these people who don't have America's best interests at heart. There is some element of truth, if you look for it, if they haven't shut it down first. So. And are you guys afraid of that with the monopoly these people seem to have on information and eventually getting to you?
Oh, we talk about it. We talk about it, certainly. In fact, Facebook banned us for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. Immediately, however, when they discovered their error, or some people reminded them of it, they reinstated us quickly.
Okay.
But we're well aware that our CEO, Art Thompson, who once had a business in Spokane, lived here for years, Art has pointed out we have one advantage over almost all of the other conservative groups. We have local distribution systems outside the internet. Right. So if that dread day should come, we have the ability to respond to it and look like the martyrs that we would be, because we have never engaged in hate peddling. We are the idealists here.
Right.
In fact, we revoke people who come into membership to spawn racial doctrines and hatreds. We won't have it, never have. We run a clean ship. We can be proud of what we do. So we could cry martyr at that point.
Well, I think it's probably your model that has given you such longevity. I belong to certain other things. Well, Tea Party, for one, that seemed to, that was like just a flash in the pan, compared to the.
Sadly.
Yeah,
Right,
sadly too. But the same thing happened. It sort of got taken over by other people who had different agendas than
And
the original
attacked.
Tea Party and the Republican Liberty Caucus, and just so many. 9/12, I think, was another group that we had too. But the Birch Society, if you go on YouTube, you can actually see Robert Welch's speech, I think, from the 1950s in black and white, but everything he said in that is true today. So there's nothing like fulfilled prophecy to get people to pay attention.
I was sitting just a few feet from him when he did that, looking back and looking forward that he did in the 1970s. I'd come on board as his representative, and I remember so well. In fact, at one of those gatherings in the late 70s, very interesting memory here, we would have banquets at the Century Plaza in Los Angeles. 2,000 people jammed into a ballroom, crawling with media, because the LA police chiefs habitually spoke to our banquet because of our national support your local police drive. Right. Okay? Why, I think in 1978, were your two Idaho congressmen sitting next to me. I remember in the chair next to me was the congressman from the 2nd District of Idaho.
That's Steve Sims?
It was George Hansen.
Okay.
Next to Steve Hansen was the apple farmer from Boise, Steve Sims, SYMMS, who was a great voice for freedom. Why would they have been in Los Angeles and risk being hung out to dry by the Los Angeles Times and the other hit piece guys? The fact is that our grassroots informational program, non-political, non-partisan, had changed the thinking of both those districts. It was my job to raise heavy money in 1974 and 75 for the expansion of our operation. We poured a disproportionate amount of the proceeds into your neighboring state of Idaho, and we flipped. I'll say that boldly, we flipped both districts. But we didn't do it by partisan politics. Robin, you're a political expert. Boy, you have all the stripes of the fight on your body. You know how tough it is. We were doing the grassroots work that will change people's wishes. They're either going to demand more government benefits or a break on government. So we brought something new to the point where one of the most radical senators in the U.S. Senate, Frank Church, was unseated. If we flip 2 congressional districts, isn't it obvious that the Senate seat would flip? And it did.
Yeah, it's interesting that Idaho, for some reason, it was a more of a Democrat state with Frank Church and Cecil Andrews, I
course
think,
it was.
as governor. But then Frank Church had kind of like the church committee actually exposed a lot of what you might call the deep state
Yes.
too after Watergate, and they started looking more into the CIA and what all it was doing.
Frank Church was a dangerous guy. He was a well-schooled snake.
Oh, really? Okay.
He was, I recall, on the Intelligence Committee. He would have been a prototype of the well-schooled operative. And I'm not saying that Frank Church was a communist. That's kind of nonsense.
Right.
But he was a state-of-mind communist. He was a hardened socialist in his program. To have him unseated by a purely educational program is a kind of a prototype for what can happen now in America, because the battle's intensifying. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
And again, when I make a bold statement, the other side's doing our advertising, I mean it.
Well, it's
That's
interesting.
why I'm here.
You should bring up George Hansen, because there's something, he's a person I kind of wanted to find out more about his story, because here's a guy, a respected man, a U.S. congressman,
Yes.
and he might have paid with his life, you know, to the deep state. You know, they actually were torturing him and, you know, put him in jail. Can you tell us a little bit about George Hansen, what you know about that?
I didn't know George.
Okay.
And I was covering all of America, 50
Uh-huh.
states at the time, so I didn't ever interview him in a setting like this, which is really neat.
Mhm.
You know, I'm here on a mission, Rob, that is interesting. It has a flashback to the Jimmy Carter administration,
Okay.
where the socialists were doing our advertising and shaking awake American businessmen. They're beginning to see how malevolent and how nasty socialism was, right? So we began, Robert Welch hired 4 very able men to help me. We became a tactical squad and went into cities that were target cities where we had in place some friends who believed us. They were reading our material. So, Rob, there's a reason that I am here at this point in time.
Uh-huh.
When I made that comment about the other side doing our advertising,
Mhm.
that's opportunity knocking.
Right.
And it reminded me so much of what happened during the Jimmy Carter administration 40-some years ago. We had a mild acting president with a group of lions behind him in his administration. Nasty socialists, insulting. They woke up a lot of people. So Mr. Welch had hired 4 great guys to help me. We could go into a city, find people that were reading our material, believed us, and show them how to network to open up the high levels of the town with our message. We didn't have a name for it in those days. We do now.
And it is?
It's called the Influence Network. I think the 2 words say the most. And I remember when my friend Rich and I were doing it here 3 years ago.
Mhm.
We went to probably 20 leading people around here and interviewed them to urge them to do something that conservatives find difficult.
Okay.
That's to talk with new people.
Uh-huh.
We have a tendency to be a little more shy, a little more isolated.
Conservative.
Yeah, conservative, less sociable sometimes. And showing these folks how they could reach out to new people rather than preaching to the choir. That's what the Influence Network does, and it's been very ably done around here. We probably have 20 people.
Well, I think
who have
we're
their
tired
own-
of being the silent majority.
Yeah.
Maybe being silent. Or because we're conservative, we tend to be cautious. But to actually take that risk is what we need to do, I think.
Yeah, well, that's
In
it.
fact, getting back to Jimmy Carter, I remember that you know, he's a very affable seeming person,
Oh,
Sunday
yeah.
school teacher, but yet almost everyone he appointed was trilateral commission members.
Great point.
Yeah.
A very sophisticated socialist administration, kind of masked by the genial nature of the front man.
Mm-hmm.
We must remember in that era that the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter, who was to become his lifelong friend, was a man he'd never met. David Rockefeller handed him as a virtual mandate to President Carter,
Uh-huh.
just as David Rockefeller had handed Henry Kissinger to Richard Nixon, whom I don't think Nixon had ever met. That's the way the deck gets stacked in this
Well, they
international
kind of,
politics.
they infiltrate both parties. And,
Yes.
you know, like David Rockefeller, as I recall, was a Democrat, and Nelson Rockefeller was a Republican, and they both had their aspirations, I think.
They
for
had their
control.
aspirations. One of the things that Robert Welch said right at the founding of the society, that we had to have our own intelligence gathering and certainly our own research capability. And it was years before I fully understood the wisdom of what he said. But we're in a situation today, we have virtually no internal security against militant socialists. And it's showing the House committee is gone, the Senate committee is gone. And so now we're in a situation today where we can help to brief the conservative people that are willing to stand up in Washington. The New American is our magazine, and Rob, I'm sure you have shown it on your program numerous times, but it is the foremost intelligence digest in the free world today.
Well, it's probably the best magazine, I think, in the country. And, one program we thought, and you might have come up with this as part of your influence network, was, we make donations like $100 or $200, but to buy a 6-month subscription to some of the New American, that actually I think was probably one of the most effective things we've done in a long time.
Well, it is. It's allowed us to follow up. I like to refer to the New American, and I wish I had brought a copy up here. I refer to it as the missionary in the mail, Rob.
Yeah.
We're in a spot today where a lot of awfully good people are fairly suspicious of what the motive is of anyone who's promoting anything. They have a tendency to, what's his game, see?
Yeah.
We also have a thing where almost all good people have been taken in by the propaganda machine on one or more issues. And so if you're going to think you have to teach your friend all the facts, he's going to pull away at some point.
Yeah.
There'll be an area where he's embarrassed or where he has an opposite viewpoint. It's better to let people discover than to tell them.
Well,
and that's what we do with the New American.
I bought I think I could afford 10 copies, so it was a couple $100 that I put into it. But one of the people I had on there was the young man I just met, Caleb Collier. And
Caleb.
Yeah. And so it certainly bore fruit, because now Caleb Collier is, one of the most effective people out there, actually very growing the Birch Society here in the Inland Empire.
Well, he does it right. Caleb does things. I was really, when I met him, like you, I was very taken with him. He can laugh.
Yeah.
He is a joyful guy. He loves what he does. He's very effective, and we had to learn a lesson in publishing. There are a lot of mistakes you can innocently make in trying to save our country. One is don't come out too strongly, and you've been successful largely because everybody likes you as well, the likability factor. Our earlier magazine, American Opinion, became too sarcastic. The term in journalism was polemical or pungent. When we formed the New American, we were more subdued. Let people discover the truth of what you're saying rather than seemingly making up his mind for it.
I think sometimes too, a lot of people, your frustrations. Here's the truth, here it is, and people seem to be, there's a curtain or a veil that crosses. So sometimes, they probably go get a little bit extreme in that. Whereas the best thing to do is you catch more flies with honey.
Well, that's very true.
You have to be kind of patient, I think.
In fact, Robert Welch, being the intellectual that he was, he really was incredible. He made a point, and he reiterated it several times, that the love of what we're trying to build, freedom, liberty, free society, the love of what we're trying to build must outweigh the fear of what we must destroy, or we'll never permanently get anywhere. We'll just recycle tyranny in different uniforms. And I think that we're doing that more and more. I get compliments in the New American everywhere I go. I cover half the United States. Being an old man, I don't cover the whole country anymore. Yeah. But I get compliments everywhere I go. People like the, could we say, tone of the magazine. They're not afraid to give it to somebody and thinking the guy will be scared. No. And so I think we're saying the same thing.
Even if you don't, you could leave it at your dentist's office on the coffee table. Someone else might pick it up and read it.
It is that kind of thing. Rob, let me kind of go off the path a little bit on something. I've said something to people that I don't think they initially understand. But there is a certain kind of person, the makeup of a certain kind of person, who's a natural for our work. You could probably say that 90% of the American people would not get it, They're not equipped to get it until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are predisposed to this. I think our cameraman today, and I met him, heard, he had what I call the chip. The chip has two aspects. The people that take to this and are going to help us to save the country are independent thinkers. The independent thinkers now know this doesn't add up. They recognize instinctively we're losing our country. The future's going away. That wasn't true necessarily 25 years ago, but if our CEO were here today, he'd say, it's all different now. We're not prophets anymore, just predicting what others couldn't perceive. That was frustrating. I'm sure you experienced it. But no, now we're just commentators commenting on why it's happening and what to do about it. It's a much more positive tack.
Yeah.
So the first aspect of the guy we're looking for and our viewers should think about are the people they know who are independent thinkers. That's probably 10% of the
Who
public.
have taken the red pill is like another.
Yeah, taking the red pill is a good statement. And the second thing they have, and I think that members of the John Birch Society or people who have been in the Tea Party deserve the gratitude of the American people because they possess the second aspect of the chip, which is social courage. That's an element. It's not the wartime courage in a battlefield. It's a different thing. But the willingness to step out ahead of the knowledge of our friends and help to lead them and get laughed at. You mentioned that earlier. I remember that. That's not what's happening today. Now, the greatest danger is people waking up and giving up in the first 90 days of reading material, which makes it necessary for us to overcome the second great weakness of conservatives. The first one is we tend to talk with each other, preaching to the choir.
Right.
The second one is we spend all too much time pounding the problem that is now pretty evident and not transitioning quickly to what to do about it effectively. We have that down to a science. If we talk about the problem perennially, we're just selling antidepressants for Upjohn or Merck. So it's counterproductive. We need to pick up our tempo of telling the truth about what to do about it. Now, you've been around a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes it's repetition before the light comes on.
Yeah.
True, and then people start thinking. If you say, okay, say here's a statement. How did Building 7 fall by itself? I mean, you're not being told something. It's not even being covered. Okay, and recently this Epstein fellow was in jail. I mean, now he's down the memory hole. You don't hear anything more about it because the problem is the press that we do have is 90% owned by five or six different corporations. So they have the narrative. And in fact, I was watching TV. I rarely watch the mainstream news, but I did happen to. I was waiting for something else to come on. I watched it for about 15 minutes, and if I watched that, I would hate, not Trump too. And whereas just by shouting and repetition, and they've taken like the Edward Bernays, school. They're experts.
They're
at this.
experts, Rob.
Just this constant pounding, pretty soon, even in my own family, and I try to. They suddenly think, oh, this is the biggest thing we have. Or the biggest threat is global warming.
Yes.
When it's just on its. And reading the John Birch magazine, the New American, they had it. Hey, here's simply like in one paragraph why it cannot be. So.
Well, a month ago, we put out a special edition of the New American called Socialism Special Report. And I remember it had a centerfold of 10 sound bites on socialism. Once you learn to answer their basic pitch, which just takes on other aspects, you can back them off, but it takes study. Because if you're only half prepared, you sound like you're saying the stupid thing. Where in reality, they are way, way out on the limb, and it can be demonstrated. And I think you've done it here in Spokane to Coeur d'Alene. You've done a fantastic job of opening eyes.
Right.
And
but it's enjoyable. I put a lot of miles in. But a lot of people put miles in that are runners. That do that
Well,
on a treadmill. You go to you see someone looking for the best parking spot. and then you see them on the treadmill. You
do.
At the health club.
You do. I think it's interesting to see.
And well, it's meaningful too, because it's I probably, before I got into this, I really didn't have any friends. I couldn't find anybody who liked to talk about the same things I did. But if you go to a Birch meeting, you're going to find people, new friends, and people that are interesting, intellectual, and are independent thinkers to talk to.
Well, you do use another aspect of this. I was thinking of that as I was preparing to be interviewed. If I were to give you just about the most common lament of good people I meet all over the country, it's that their churches will not talk about these issues.
Right.
These are not liberal pastors, but they act like politicians.
Oh, they're afraid to. Oh,
They're
we can't
afraid.
do that. Whereas, actually, there's a lot of I do have friends on the left, but they all go to a Unitarian church, and they talk about it all the time. I mean, from the pulpit,
With
but
no
they're
fear,
not afraid.
no afraid at all. But that is an area. So you brought up something. Friendships in the movement, fellowship. I think there's a tendency, it's just my view perhaps, that in this effort, and we're 61 years old, Rob, we're turning 61 this fall, we can get too grim about this and not have enough fun. I'll say again, Birch is back.
Yeah.
It'll be more and more evident, but I think we should be adding fun, food, and fellowship to the effort. Our gatherings should be one where friends can gather while pushing on this wagon. And I'm seeing that. Our growth in some areas today is wonderful, and you're in one of them. There are other areas where people are dragging along bad memories of when they couldn't get the point across. That day's over. Wherever people are now stepping out, we're seeing great success.
Well, it's nice to find other people. If you're out by yourself, maybe I'm the problem, but you're around a lot of other people, then that you reach that critical mass where you can actually do what is called birching. What is birching?
Well, birching sometimes is finding nice ways to awaken the sleeping, and in a nice way to let them know what they've been missing. That's birching. But then taking them to solutions. We have a publication that our members get that's unique in the conservative movement. It's called the Bulletin of the John Birch Society. And I ought to probably have brought one to this interview. But in it, it's an 8-page publication, the only solutions publication in the conservative movement. 61 years after inception of the John Birch Society, we still have nobody else who is putting out a guide to what to do about it. And the first 3 or 4 pages deal with something I thought for a moment you were going to say. In medicine, a correct diagnosis is the key to cure. If the doctor, you saw him on your annual exam and he said, I just saw this panel here. I don't like what I see, but I don't really know what's going on here, Rob. I think we better get you somewhere where people can diagnose this. So they'll send you to MD Anderson or the Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins, right? Where they've seen it before.
Yeah.
Okay, for us, our diagnosis of what's causing this, causation, we have that down like no American group. Now, you can get into all kinds of wild speculative theories which do no one any good. You know that.
Right.
You have to have a discipline in your inquiry and what you say. You have to be able to prove your statements. But our diagnosis of conspiracy is over 60 years old, and now there's a new attractive name for what we were saying then. Now, we've learned more about the ins and outs, Rob, but we have been right on that deep state element from the beginning.
You mean the name deep state?
The deep state is not entrenched bureaucracy. I'm sorry. That is only the symptom of the fact that there were agents of global socialism and the New World Order working in our government and our media over 60 years ago. The deep state is just an interesting uniform. So
it has changed. It was like the communist scare, the Red Scare that we had, but actually communism was maybe a subset of these people that they used,
Yes.
and actually they were globalists going for a one-world government.
Well,
That's a collective, and of course the elite are in charge. They pull all the strings.
the elite in charge. Now, I just did get a copy of The New America. Again, It's an intelligence digest, but it also has readable features. But this is the issue of about a year and a half ago
Hold it up.
called The Deep State. Special report. Oh man, we've had lots of orders for this. But again, it's just a term for something that had long gone on. You could read a book called From Major Jordan's Diaries.
That's what I just wrote down. My friend said, okay, make sure you ask about Creature from Jekyll Island and From Major Jordan's
Did you
Diaries.
read that? Okay.
But I don't know anything about Major Jordan's Diaries.
Well,
That's something I should
I'll
order?
tell you. Sure. The John Birch Society, and you can reach us at jbs.org. I think you know that. You can contact thenewamerican.com. But if you asked or called us, our phone number in Appleton, Wisconsin is 920-749-3780, and say you want to see an old book in paperback called From Major Jordan's Diaries. The man told how the Soviets got the A-bomb.
Okay.
They got it from us. You want to know how the Red Chinese have been equipped to fight us? You don't have to look any more than the U.S. government authorizing the sale of the components. Well, this matter was during World War II.
And I thought it was the Rosenbergs.
Yeah, they were certainly involved. But that's a book. I'm trying to remember the name of the author. But the other book that you brought up that was in your mind, The Creature from Jekyll Island. I knew the author G. Edward Griffin many years ago, 45 to 50 years ago. He was the best public relations guy you could have writing videos. He had discovered that the Federal Reserve System had been a staged event, that the Rockefellers' uncle, Nelson Aldrich, the senator from New York, had arranged a private meeting at Jekyll Island, Georgia, near Sea Island, just north of Jacksonville, and the top sinister bankers, because certainly not all bankers are sinister, but the bad ones had secretly taken a sealed train out of Manhattan, where they didn't even use their names, so the waiters in the club car wouldn't know the luminaries that were there. My company, my wealth management company, had a fly-in seminar there in 1993. Our first session, our welcome, was in the room where the preliminary draft of the Federal Reserve was approved. This book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, tells the roots, the background, and the program of the Federal Reserve. You remember the aviator, his father, and I think you remember that name when
Lindbergh?
Yeah, Lindbergh's father was a congressman from Little Falls, Minnesota. His comment when he learned about this secret meeting is, essentially, oh goody, now we can have scientifically engineered booms and busts. You look at 1929, I think the U.S. money supply, phony money, funny money, was increased 69% from 1913 to 1929. All it took is a hat pin to hit that inflated balloon. And the case has been pretty well established. There were people that knew about that before it happened. It was a staged event. Well, why is it that so much of modern American history is one staged event after another, Rob? It's so funny that if someone were beginning to contemplate this for the first time, I think this is an exceedingly important point. We would assume it was a make-up story. It is so bizarre, and people need time to kind of discover this, integrate it in their own minds. I remember my reaction when I was first told about this. It seemed preposterous. Until we study it. G. Edward Griffin in the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, put it together in the most readable fashion. I've known guys that are non-readers who will be coaxed into reading the first chapter. They took it along on vacation and almost canceled the vacation.
Well, that book influenced me more than anything else in my life, except the Bible, of course. But I started reading. It's a thick book, but the font is big. But everything is documented in it. And I started highlighting like I normally do, and pretty soon I quit highlighting because I kept highlighting everything, and there was no purpose in
I
it.
know the feeling, oh, how I could destroy books. That book is so valuable. We're selling a lot of it today.
Well, people need, and I think with the whole, it's kind of coming to a head with Trump versus the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
A lot of people laughed at the gold standard. Now, hey, Dex probably does work better than unlimited credit card. And, you know, and who got bailed out? It wasn't we the people. It was the central banks.
Oh, my word. And we owe a huge debt in America to a little pug who can take a punch and land one. Ron Paul. Congressman Ron Paul could sit and stare down the chairman of the Fed in a hearing, deal with him on a parity basis because he knew his facts. And so we've had, and I think it's important in this movement for freedom, we've had heroes. John Birch was just one of a string of wonderful Americans who've come along, and you have a real surge going on of liberty activity up in this area. I call it, when I go elsewhere, because I love coming here, I refer to the Spokane to Coeur d'Alene corridor. We have lots happening. We have a hard time managing growth in this area. Doing new member briefings so our members know all their privileges. One of our biggest challenges is to help new members. I'll take that problem.
Okay. How does someone become a new member? What do they do?
Well, the financial costs are so small that they're almost incidental. All of our new members receive this magazine, which annually is a $49 investment. It comes with the membership. Our monthly bulletin, that solutions publications included. So there is very little left over of the $87 a year membership. But if people want to join us, they can either call, they can email us, and my area is just a little different. I started as a field coordinator, like the man Caleb you mentioned, who's doing a great job. But my work came to be to work with community leaders. And I love doing that. You have people really doing a job around here using their influence positions in this area. And so I love it when they contact me. My name, and it's easy to miss, it's John Selck. I always joke, it's a Hanoverian name. That's where King George got his dumb German foot soldiers who would go anywhere, anytime. That's been my life, Rob. I've been going anywhere every time.
Well, I did the thing. I was actually Eastern Washington coordinator for Ron Paul in 2008, 2012. So
you were.
I considered myself a Ron Paul revere. Running around to the different counties, and we actually did pretty well. But it was pretty tough for Ron to win. I mean, the machine, was behind the anointed ones, McCain and Romney. But Trump is different. Trump. I loved Ron Paul, but I think Trump actually, if he could do what he's said he's going to do, and we just see the tip of the iceberg, I think. But he would definitely be on Mount Rushmore. Anyway, if he's able to do this, so but it's important for us too to keep it going. Okay, now we could all live happily ever after. Well, it never ends. It's always kind of a constant battle, isn't it?
He is a phenom. He's like a wildfire. Living in Southern California as I do, I've seen some mean wildfires. But wildfire develops its own wind system. Donald Trump is the only political leader I've ever seen who creates his own windstorm. He is a remarkable fellow. Sometimes I cringe when I hear the way that he'll do heavy damage to his adversary. It's hardly what you'd call a gentleman's debate sometimes. But he's a hero. When you see a Franklin Graham sitting at his shoulder, ready to put Franklin's shield in front of the vulnerable hero, we're at a significant point in history. Franklin Graham's father knew a lot of presidents. But Franklin Graham has put his good reputation in front of a hero. It's a fascinating time. I feel sorry for the more passive people who believe what we believe, who are not getting in on the excitement of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have a duty. We have, of course, a duty to God. We have a duty to our family. We have a duty to our business. But so we also have a civic duty, too. And it's more than just voting. It's also like you actually seeing and influencing the influential people, like your commissioners and your city council people and your representatives. As part of the Birch thing. And I think there was a thing, the Power of 500, I read about, that if you can get 500 people in one congressional district, which has, 700,000 or 800,000 people, you can actually flip that district around.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's my view, and I might be wrong, but in some areas, well, first of all, there's some areas you're not going to flip anything. You can go to putrid Portland, and you're not going to flip anything. The enemy now owns it.
Right.
And there are other areas like this. But typically the margin of victory is 50,000 or less. Our numbers show that 500 Birch members doing just educating, changing the will and the demand of the people will flip it. But I believe, Rob, you can do it in this electronic era with less than 500 if they use good methods.
Well, it's kind of like throwing a rock in a pond. You get that ripple effect.
That's right. That is precisely what it is. So we've covered an awful lot of stuff today.
Well, I think you've probably sold anybody who's watching. So once again, do they just go to jbs.org and send an email, hey, how do I get involved? And
get somebody in contact with me, and we'll get that done mighty quickly. Okay. But we try to do a new member briefing right after that so people know what they can accomplish.
You plant, but you got to water it.
You do, certainly.
So, it's kind of planting a seed. I mean, it's not all going to sprout, but there is some fertile soil out there. So, anyway, I think we've had a wonderful conversation with John Selck. So, if you're interested in joining the John Birch Society, I'm a member too, we might run into each other, then go to jbs.org and send them an email, hey, how do I get started? And then I'm sure they'll get a call from that. Anyway, this has been Cut to the Chase, and let's not forget to pray first.
This has been Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase, where we cover anything under the sun that would be of interest to you, our viewers. Cut to the Chase has been brought to you by the Inland Northwest Report.com, alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. Don't forget to catch the Sunday edition of Cut to the Chase, where Rob interviews local pastors on Christian perspectives. Until next time, stay in prayer for God, family, and country.